Hello, I'm Jaffer. I want to share my story about learning English with you. Just a short time ago, I could barely understand or speak a single word of English. I remember those days clearly, when I would sit alone in my room, feeling overwhelmed and unsure of what to do. The thought of learning English was always on my mind, but I didn't know where to begin. It seemed like a huge mountain that I had to climb, and I didn't know how to take the first step. Every day, I would think about why learning English was so important to me. I needed English for my job. Many people I worked with spoke English, and I knew that if I could understand and speak the language, I would be able to do my job better. I also wanted to travel to new places where people spoke English. I dreamed of visiting different countries, exploring new cultures, and meeting new people. But I knew that without English, traveling would be difficult, and I wouldn't be able to communicate with the people I met. This made me realize that learning English wasn't just a choice. It was something I needed to do if I wanted to achieve my goals. The more I thought about it, the more I understood how important English was for connecting with people around the world. English is a global language, spoken by millions of people in many different countries. I wanted to be a part of that global community. I wanted to be able to talk to people from different cultures, share ideas, and learn from them. But every time I thought about learning English, it felt like such a big and difficult task. The language was so different from what I was used to. The words sounded strange, and I couldn't understand them. The sentences didn't make sense to me, and I felt like I was lost in a sea of unfamiliar words and sounds. There were many moments when I would sit and think about where to start. Should I begin with learning new words? Should I focus on listening to English, or should I try to speak it right away? These questions kept going around in my mind, and I didn't know the answers. I didn't have a clear plan, and this made me feel even more confused. I wanted to learn English, but I didn't know how to start. The more I thought about it, the more difficult it seemed. It was like standing at the bottom of a tall mountain, looking up and wondering how I would ever reach the top. I remember feeling very alone during this time. I knew that many people around the world were learning English, but I felt like I was the only one struggling with it. I would watch videos online of people speaking English so easily, and it made me feel like I was so far behind. They made it look so simple, but for me, it was anything but simple. I would try to listen to them speak, but the words were too fast, and I couldn't keep up. I would try to read simple sentences, but I didn't understand what they meant. It was frustrating, and sometimes it made me want to give up before I even started. I also knew that learning English would take a lot of time and effort. It wasn't something that I could learn in a day or even a week. It would take months, maybe even years to become good at it. The thought of spending so much time on something that felt so difficult was overwhelming. I worried that even if I tried my best, I might still not be able to learn it. I didn't want to fail, and this fear of failure made me hesitate. It made me doubt myself and my ability to learn a new language. But despite all these doubts and fears, there was something inside me that didn't want to give up. I knew that learning English was important, and I knew that it would open up many opportunities for me. I knew that if I could just take the first step, I would be on my way to achieving something great. I didn't want to let my fear stop me from reaching my goals. I wanted to be able to look back one day and say that I had tried my best, that I had taken on the challenge and succeeded. I wanted to prove to myself that I could do it. So, even though I was scared and unsure of what to do, I decided that I had to start somewhere. I decided that I would take it one step at a time, learning a little bit each day. I knew that the journey ahead would be long and difficult, but I also knew that I had to start if I ever wanted to reach my goals. I had to push through the fear and the doubt and just take that first step. I knew that it wouldn't be easy, but I also knew that it would be worth it in the end. And so, with a lot of determination and a little bit of hope, I began my journey of learning English. It wasn't easy, and there were many challenges along the way. But I kept going, step by step, day by day, learning a little more each time. I knew that I was at the beginning of a long journey, but I also knew that every journey begins with a single step. And that first step was the most important one of all. As I look back now, I realize how far I've come since those early days. I remember the confusion, the fear, and the doubt, but I also remember the determination and the hope that kept me going. Learning English was not an easy journey, but it was a journey that taught me a lot about myself. It taught me that I am capable of more than I thought, that I can overcome challenges, and that I can achieve my goals if I am willing to put in the effort. I'm still on this journey, and I still have a lot to learn, but I'm no longer afraid. I'm no longer overwhelmed by the thought of learning English. Instead, I'm excited about the possibilities that lie ahead. I'm excited to keep learning, to keep improving, and to keep pushing myself to reach new heights. I know that there will be more challenges along the way, but I also know that I am strong enough to face them, and that knowledge gives me the confidence to keep moving forward, step by step, day by day. As I continued to think about my future, I realized that learning English was not just a good idea. It was necessary if I wanted to achieve my dreams. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became that English was the key to unlocking the opportunities I wanted for myself. I began to imagine what my life could be like if I could speak English well. I pictured myself traveling to new and exciting places, places where people spoke English. I imagined walking through the streets of cities I had never been to, talking to the locals, and understanding what they were saying. I dreamed of being able to ask for directions, order food in a restaurant, or even have a simple conversation with someone I met along the way. The idea of traveling to new countries was something that excited me a lot. I had always wanted to see the world, to explore different cultures, and to meet people from all walks of life. But I knew that without English, these experiences would be difficult, if not impossible. I didn't want to be stuck in one place, unable to communicate or understand what was going on around me. I wanted to be free to explore, to connect with people, and to make the most of every opportunity that came my way. The thought of being able to do this pushed me to take the first step towards learning English. But it wasn't just about travel. I also knew that English would help me in my career. In today's world, English is the language of business. It's spoken in companies all around the globe, and I knew that if I could speak English, I would have a better chance of advancing in my job. I imagined myself in meetings, confidently speaking in English, sharing my ideas, and being understood by everyone in the room. I saw myself working on international projects, communicating with colleagues and clients from different countries, and being able to do my job well because I could speak the language they spoke. These thoughts made me realize that learning English wasn't just about achieving one specific goal. It was about opening up a world of possibilities for myself. It was about being able to live the life I wanted, to have the experiences I dreamed of, and to be successful in my career. The more I thought about it, the more determined I became to learn English. I knew that it wouldn't be easy, but I also knew that it would be worth it. So, with these dreams in mind, I decided to take the first step. I knew that I couldn't do it on my own, so I enrolled in an English course. I found a class that fit my schedule, and I signed up right away. I was excited to start, but also a little nervous. I knew that learning a new language would be challenging, and I wasn't sure if I would be able to keep up. But I reminded myself of my goals and how important they were to me. I knew that if I wanted to achieve them, I had to learn English, so I pushed aside my doubts and focused on taking that first step. In addition to the course, I also bought a few books to help me learn. I chose books that were designed for beginners, with simple explanations and lots of examples. I knew that I needed to build a strong foundation, so I spent time going through the books, studying the basic grammar rules, and learning new words. It wasn't easy, and there were times when I felt frustrated because the information didn't seem to stick. But I kept going, reminding myself of why I was doing this. I also started watching English videos online. I found videos on different topics. Some were about travel, some were about business, and some were just people talking about their everyday lives. At first, it was very difficult. The words came too fast, and I couldn't understand what was being said. It felt like noise, just a jumble of sounds that didn't make any sense. I would watch a video and feel like I hadn't learned anything because I couldn't follow along, but I didn't let that discourage me. I knew that it was going to take time, and I was prepared for that. I kept watching the videos, even if I didn't understand everything. I told myself that it was okay to start small, to learn little by little, and that eventually it would start to make sense. There were moments when I felt overwhelmed, when it seemed like I wasn't making any progress. Learning a new language is a big challenge, and it's easy to feel discouraged when things don't go as planned. But every time I felt like giving up, I reminded myself of the reasons why I was doing this. I thought about my dreams of traveling, of meeting new people, and of advancing in my career. I imagined how great it would feel to be able to speak English confidently, to understand what others were saying, and to be understood in return. These thoughts kept me motivated, even when things were tough. One thing I learned early on was that perseverance is key. Learning a new language doesn't happen overnight. It's a gradual process that requires patience and dedication. There were times when I would study for hours and still feel like I hadn't made any progress. But I knew that every little bit of effort was bringing me closer to my goal. I reminded myself that learning English was a journey, not a race, and that it was okay to take things one step at a time. What mattered was that I was moving forward, no matter how slowly. I also found that it helped to break things down into smaller tasks. Instead of trying to learn everything at once, I focused on one thing at a time. One day, I might work on vocabulary, learning a few new words and practicing how to use them in sentences. Another day, I might focus on listening, watching a video, and trying to pick out words or phrases that I recognized. By breaking things down, I made the process more manageable and less overwhelming. It also helped me to see the progress I was making, even if it was small. Another important thing I learned was the value of practice. It's one thing to learn the rules of a language, but it's another to actually use them in real-life situations. I knew that if I wanted to be able to speak English well, I needed to practice as much as possible. So, I looked for opportunities to use the language in my everyday life. I started small, practicing simple sentences in my head, or trying to think in English instead of my native language. I also practiced speaking out loud, even if I was just talking to myself. The more I practiced, the more comfortable I became with the language. Looking back, I realized that the decision to take that first step was the most important one I made. It wasn't easy, and there were many challenges along the way, but I knew that if I wanted to achieve my dreams, I had to keep going. The process of learning English was difficult, but it was also rewarding. Every time I learned something new, no matter how small, it felt like a victory. Each new word, each new sentence, was a step closer to the future I wanted for myself. And that thought kept me motivated, even when things were tough. In the end, I learned that the key to achieving my dreams was not just about learning English, it was about believing in myself, staying motivated, and being willing to put in the effort. It was about taking that first step, even when it felt difficult, and continuing to move forward, no matter what challenges I faced. Learning English was a journey, and like any journey, it had its ups and downs. But it was a journey that I knew I had to take if I wanted to achieve my dreams, and that realization gave me the strength and determination to keep going, one step at a time. The first few weeks of learning English were incredibly difficult. Every day felt like I was facing a new challenge, and it wasn't long before I started to feel overwhelmed. One of the hardest parts for me was pronunciation. The sounds in English were so different from what I was used to, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't seem to get them right. I would listen to native speakers and then try to repeat what they said, but my attempts always seemed to fall short. The words just didn't sound the same when I said them. It was frustrating, and it made me feel self-conscious. I knew that I wasn't pronouncing the words correctly, and I worried that people would laugh at me or not understand what I was trying to say. Because of this, I often hesitated to speak English, even when I had the opportunity. Another big challenge was grammar. English grammar felt like a never-ending maze of rules and exceptions. I would spend hours studying, trying to understand the rules, but they just didn't seem to stick. I kept mixing them up, and every time I thought I had mastered one rule, I would come across something that completely confused me. I remember trying to write simple sentences, only to realize that I had used the wrong tense or placed the words in the wrong order. It was disheartening to see how many mistakes I was making, even after putting in so much effort. Speaking with others was perhaps the most intimidating challenge of all. I knew that practice was important, but every time I tried to have a conversation in English, I would freeze. My mind would go blank, and I couldn't find the right words to say. It felt like the words were there, just out of reach, but I couldn't grab them. When I finally managed to speak, my sentences were often broken and filled with mistakes. I could see the confusion on people's faces as they tried to understand what I was saying, and that only made me feel more anxious. There were times when I avoided speaking altogether, afraid of embarrassing myself. It felt safer to stay silent than to risk making a mistake. As the days went by, these struggles started to take a toll on me. I began to doubt myself and my ability to learn English. I wondered if maybe it was just too hard for me, if I had taken on more than I could handle. There were moments when I felt like giving up, when the thought of continuing seemed too exhausting. I would think to myself, maybe I'm not cut out for this. Maybe I should just quit. The idea of quitting was tempting, especially when things seemed so difficult. But even as these thoughts crossed my mind, there was something that kept me going. Deep down, I knew that if I quit now, I would regret it later. I didn't want to look back and wish that I had tried harder. I didn't want to give up on my dreams just because the journey was tough. I reminded myself of why I started this journey in the first place, of the goals I wanted to achieve, and the opportunities that learning English could bring. I knew that if I gave up, I would be closing the door on those opportunities. So, even though the challenges were great and the road ahead seemed long, I decided to keep going. I knew that it wouldn't be easy, but I also knew that nothing worth having ever is. I told myself that it was okay to struggle, that it was okay to make mistakes, and that the important thing was to keep trying. I realized that learning a new language is not something that happens overnight. It's a process, and every step, no matter how small, brings you closer to your goal. I also began to understand that these hurdles were a natural part of the learning process. Everyone who learns a new language faces challenges, and it's normal to feel frustrated at times. The key is to not let those challenges stop you. Instead of seeing them as obstacles, I started to see them as opportunities to learn and grow. Every mistake I made was a chance to improve. Every struggle was a sign that I was pushing myself to become better. In the end, I realized that perseverance was the most important lesson of all. It wasn't about being perfect or learning everything at once. It was about continuing to move forward, even when the road was tough. The challenges I faced in those first few weeks were difficult, but they also made me stronger. They taught me the value of persistence, and they showed me that I was capable of more than I had ever imagined. Looking back, I'm glad that I didn't let those early hurdles stop me. They were tough, but they were also a necessary part of my journey. They pushed me to work harder, to be more patient with myself, and to keep my eyes on the goal. And most importantly, they taught me that no challenge is too great if you are determined to overcome it. As I continued my journey of learning English, it became clear that the methods I was using weren't enough. I needed to find better ways to learn, ways that would help me make real progress. I realized that I had to approach learning English with more structure and consistency if I wanted to see improvement. This led me to develop a plan, a set of strategies that I could rely on every day. The first thing I decided to do was to practice English every single day. I knew that if I wanted to get better, I needed to make learning a daily habit. Even if I was busy or tired, I committed to practicing for at least 10 minutes each day. It didn't matter if it was morning or evening, I just made sure to set aside some time for English. This daily practice helped me stay focused and made sure that I was constantly reinforcing what I was learning. Over time, those 10 minutes started to add up, and I began to notice that I was making progress. One of the tools I found particularly helpful was flashcards. I created flashcards for new vocabulary words that I came across in my studies. On one side of the card, I wrote the word in English, and on the other side, I wrote the translation in my native language. Throughout the day, whenever I had a few spare moments, I would pull out my flashcards and go through them. I would test myself to see if I could remember the meaning of each word. The more I practiced with the flashcards, the better I got at recalling the words when I needed them. This was especially helpful because building a strong vocabulary is so important when learning a new language. The more words you know, the easier it is to understand and communicate. In addition to using flashcards, I decided to immerse myself in English through music. I started listening to English songs, paying close attention to the lyrics. At first, it was difficult to understand what the singers were saying, but I didn't let that discourage me. I would listen to the same song over and over again, trying to catch more words each time. I also looked up the lyrics online and read them while I listened to the song. This helped me connect the sounds I was hearing with the words on the page. Over time, I began to understand more of the lyrics, and I even started to sing along. This not only helped me improve my listening skills, but it also made learning English more enjoyable. Music has a way of making learning fun, and I found that I was more motivated to practice because I enjoyed the songs I was listening to. Watching movies in English became another key part of my strategy. I chose movies that I was familiar with, so that I wouldn't get too lost in the plot if I didn't understand everything. I turned on the English subtitles so I could read along as the characters spoke. This helped me see how the words were used in context and gave me a better understanding of sentence structure and grammar. After watching a scene, I would sometimes pause the movie and repeat the phrases I had just heard. This helped me practice my pronunciation and get used to speaking in a more natural way. Repeating phrases from movies also helped me build my confidence because I was able to mimic the way native speakers talked. But the most important step I took was to start speaking with native English speakers. This was by far the most intimidating part of my learning journey. I was so afraid of making mistakes and embarrassing myself. I worried that people would judge me or that I wouldn't be able to keep up with the conversation. But I knew that if I wanted to really improve my speaking skills, I had to push past that fear. So I started looking for opportunities to practice speaking English with others. I joined online language exchange groups where I could chat with native speakers who were learning my language. This way, we could help each other out. The first few conversations were nerve-wracking. I stumbled over my words, made a lot of mistakes, and sometimes felt completely lost. But the people I spoke with were patient and understanding. They didn't mind if I made mistakes, and they often corrected me in a kind way. I quickly learned that making mistakes was not something to be ashamed of. It was actually a very important part of the learning process. Every time I made a mistake, I learned something new. For example, if I used the wrong word, the person I was speaking with would correct me, and I would remember that correction for next time. Over time, I began to feel more comfortable speaking in English. I realized that the more I practiced, the easier it became. My sentences started to flow more naturally, and I was able to express myself more clearly. In addition to speaking with native speakers, I also practiced speaking on my own. I would have conversations with myself in English, thinking about what I would say in different situations. For example, if I was walking down the street, I might imagine how I would ask for directions in English. If I was at home, I might pretend I was explaining something to a friend in English. These imaginary conversations helped me practice forming sentences and thinking in English, even when I didn't have someone to talk to. Another strategy that helped me was setting small, achievable goals for myself. Instead of trying to learn everything at once, I focused on one thing at a time. One week, I might focus on learning a specific set of vocabulary words. The next week, I might focus on improving my pronunciation of certain sounds. By breaking down my learning into smaller tasks, I was able to make steady progress without feeling overwhelmed. Each time I reached a goal, no matter how small, I felt a sense of accomplishment. This kept me motivated to keep going. I also made sure to review what I had learned regularly. It's easy to forget new information if you don't use it, so I made it a point to go back and review my flashcards, rewatch movies, and revisit songs I had learned. This constant review helped reinforce the material in my mind and made it easier to remember. One of the most valuable lessons I learned through this process was the importance of being patient with myself. Learning a new language is a long journey, and it's easy to get frustrated when progress seems slow. But I reminded myself that every little bit of practice was bringing me closer to my goal. I learned to celebrate small victories, like understanding a new song lyric or having a successful conversation in English. These moments reminded me that I was improving, even if it didn't always feel like it. In the end, the strategies I used helped me build a solid foundation in English. By practicing daily, using flashcards, immersing myself in English through music and movies, and most importantly, by speaking with native speakers, I was able to make significant progress. I learned that the key to success was consistency, patience, and a willingness to make mistakes. With these strategies in place, I felt more confident in my ability to learn English and more excited about the journey ahead. As time went on, I continued to follow the strategies I had set for myself. I practiced every day, immersed myself in English through songs and movies, and challenged myself by speaking with native speakers. But even though I was working hard, I didn't always feel like I was making progress. There were days when I wondered if I was truly improving or if I was just going through the motions. Learning a new language can often feel like an uphill battle, where the rewards are slow to come. But then, something remarkable happened, something that changed everything for me. One afternoon, I decided to take a break from studying and treat myself to a coffee at a local cafe. It was a quiet place where I could relax and clear my mind. As I sipped my drink and gazed out the window, I couldn't help but overhear a conversation happening at the table next to me. Two people were chatting in English, and normally I would have tuned out their conversation, assuming I wouldn't understand much of it. But this time, something was different. As I listened, I started to recognize the words and phrases they were using. At first, it was just a few words here and there, but then I realized I could understand entire sentences. I found myself following along with their conversation, and to my astonishment, I understood most of what they were saying. I could hardly believe it. It felt surreal, as if a switch had been flipped in my brain. The language that had once seemed so foreign and confusing was now making sense to me. I sat there in the cafe, my heart racing with excitement. All the hours I had spent practicing, studying, and struggling were finally starting to pay off. I had reached a point where English was no longer just a collection of random sounds and words. It was becoming a language I could actually understand and use. That moment in the cafe was a huge confidence boost for me. It showed me that I was making real progress, even if I hadn't always noticed it. But the turning point didn't stop there. A few days later, I had another experience that solidified my belief in my abilities. I had a friend from another country who spoke English fluently, and we often communicated in our native languages. But this time, I decided to challenge myself. I suggested that we have a conversation in English instead. At first, I was nervous. Speaking with a native speaker was one thing, but having a full conversation in English with someone who knew me well felt even more daunting. I worried that I might stumble over my words or that the conversation would come to an awkward halt. But to my surprise, the conversation flowed more smoothly than I had expected. We talked for almost 30 minutes, discussing everything from our favorite books to our plans for the weekend. I won't say that I spoke perfectly. There were definitely moments when I made mistakes, hesitated, or had to search for the right word. But what mattered most was that I was able to keep the conversation going. I was able to express my thoughts and ideas in English, and my friend understood me. That conversation was a major milestone in my journey. It showed me that I could use English not just in a classroom or a controlled environment, but in real-life situations. The sense of accomplishment I felt after that conversation was incredible. For the first time, I truly believed that I could become fluent in English. It wasn't just a distant dream anymore. It was something within my reach. That newfound confidence motivated me to keep pushing forward, to continue practicing, and to take on new challenges. The turning point wasn't just about understanding a conversation or having a chat with a friend. It was about realizing that I had the ability to succeed. It was about recognizing that all the hard work, the struggles, and the moments of doubt were leading me to this point. As I reflect on my journey of learning English, I realize how much I've grown, not just in terms of language skills, but also as a person. Learning English has been about so much more than just memorizing words, grammar rules, or pronunciation. It's been a journey of persistence, patience, and self-discovery. When I first started, I thought that learning English was about cramming as much information into my brain as possible. I believed that if I could just memorize enough words or master enough grammar rules, I would eventually become fluent. But as I look back, I see that the real key to success wasn't in the memorization. It was in the practice. Consistent practice was what made the difference. Every time I practiced, I was reinforcing what I had learned, even if it didn't feel like it at the time. Each conversation, each flashcard, each song I listened to was another step forward, another piece of the puzzle falling into place. Persistence was also crucial. There were so many times when I felt like giving up, when the challenges seemed too great and the progress too slow. But I kept going, even when it was hard, because I knew that giving up wasn't an option. I knew that if I just kept trying, I would eventually get there. One of the most important lessons I've learned is the power of self-belief. When I started, I was filled with doubts. I wasn't sure if I could really learn English, if I could really achieve my goals. But as I overcame each challenge, my confidence grew. I began to believe in myself and my abilities. I realized that mistakes are a natural part of the learning process, and that each mistake I made was actually a step forward. Instead of seeing mistakes as failures, I began to see them as opportunities to learn and improve. This shift in mindset made all the difference. It allowed me to approach learning English with a sense of curiosity and excitement rather than fear and anxiety. If I can share one piece of advice with others who are learning English, it would be this: don't give up. No matter how difficult it may seem, no matter how many mistakes you make, keep going. Keep practicing, keep challenging yourself, and most importantly, keep believing in yourself. Learning a new language is a long journey, and there will be ups and downs along the way. But every step you take brings you closer to your goal. Every mistake you make is an opportunity to learn, and every challenge you overcome is a sign of progress. Now, as I look ahead, I'm excited about the possibilities that lie before me. I know that there is still much to learn, and that my journey isn't over. But I'm no longer intimidated by the challenges ahead. Instead, I'm eager to continue improving, to use my English in new and exciting ways, and to explore the world that has opened up to me through this language. Whether it's traveling to new countries, meeting people from different cultures, or advancing in my career, I know that my English skills will serve me well. The adventure of learning English has been filled with twists and turns, but I'm proud of how far I've come. I'm proud of the effort I've put in, the challenges I've overcome, and the progress I've made. And as I continue on this journey, I know that the best is yet to come.